Welcome, everyone, to 8 Cubes, a show where myself and Lamby series, two of the best Marvel Snap players in the world, like to talk about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap, starting with this month, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is on this list because she has become the ultimate stat stick in the game. Now that Werewolf by Night has been nerfed, there is nowhere to get more efficient stats than Miss Marvel as a relative 415 if you fulfill her conditions, which has made her one of the most influential cards in the entire game of Marvel Snap. She's gone back into my Loki decks, and that is one of the things that really prompted this whole metagame, which is this is a Miss Marvel metagame. Rogan and Enchantress are everywhere, and Miss Marvel is the card that the whole game is rotating around right now. What are your thoughts, Lamby?
Yeah, so this card, the more I play this card, the more I feel like it's literally possible to play this in every deck. Like, not even kidding, like every deck. Even the decks like Loki that play 4-1 cost cards or something, you can somehow augment it to play this card because 415 is a lot, right? And like I feel like it's you're very willing to not play like certain like same cost cards in the same lane just so you can benefit off the extra +5. Because the extra +5 is like it's like the Doctor Doom that every deck can run with very little downside, and it's cheaper, and obviously Zabu synergy as well. So yeah, I think I agree with Cam in the sense that I feel like this Miss Marvel card is like pretty much splashable in everything. I've seen this in really everything, by the way. KM does it in Loki. I've seen it in Destroy. I've seen it in Thanos. I've seen it in Sarah, Sarah's doing this thing as well, and we even see it in like what the most random of decks. Like this card can go anywhere. Obviously not in Cerebro decks, but like
I mean,
you could
decks.
Cerebro 5 works with this perfectly well, yes. But I feel like when it comes to this kind of globally used cards, like every deck can use cards. This kind of cards will eventually get a hit, right? Surely, like every deck runs this card. At this point, you cannot deny that. You cannot deny that. Like every like other game you play, you expect to see Miss Marvel, and also that influences the kind of cards you play in your deck to tag for Miss Marvel, which we will go into a bit later.
I think the really interesting thing about the Miss Marvel's thing is that she's the same like in absolute terms, she's as strong as she already was, but in relative terms, she's stronger now than she ever has been, and that's because they kept nerfing everything that was stronger than her. People talk about Wolf, right? Wolf, oh, it's a 317. And it's like, yeah, that's why the Loki decks weren't Miss Marvel decks previously, because of the Wolf. I ended up posting like a ongoing like Dino Miss Marvel Loki deck and being like, it's actually bizarre that this deck works now because it breaks every rule of being good in a Loki mirror. It's just playing like all good cards, but it turns out Loki just needs to be slapped on to whatever the most efficient point strategy is, and Miss Marvel's the most efficient point strategy. And if you lose those mirrors, oh well, it's going to help you in every other matchup. And that is the major thing that I think is really striking me about Miss Marvel, which that I don't think people are really addressing. It's not that she's been OP this whole time. She's probably been a bit good this whole time, like within nerf range this whole time, but not like, oh my god, oppressive. This is her time to shine. She has currently gained the status of, in my opinion, the best card in the game. However, despite the fact that Miss Marvel is in most, if not all, the good decks, I believe she was in 6 of the 11 decks on my tier list yesterday. And that is, a lot, but the metagame is actually pretty open, in my opinion. There's a lot of viable things that can be done. And I think a lot of the credit for that goes to both Loki being at a much lower play rate and the sort of crucible that decks were in when Loki was at a high play rate, leading to what I would describe as a real advancement in how we build decks. I feel like players of Marvel Snap have gotten so much smarter over the course of Loki's run in terms of understanding how decks interact with your opponent, because Loki basically forced that on you. And thinking about that consistently, it almost feels like the entire Marvel Snap community had a level up, and we're able to find more viable and good decks now. And I'm actually really impressed with the wide variety of decks you can play. Like, for example, you remember Nalguidan from Hearthstone, right? The former Grandmaster. He's
Yes.
just playing Shinnot, and he has been for like 2 months, and he's just crushing with it. And it's like, oh, wow, you can actually just get that done still. And, you know, yes, you have to make some concessions. You can't play Cosmo because if people are playing Legion and Snowguard, it doesn't actually do anything. So you play Shocker instead. So you can accidentally, like, you know, randomly hit like your Hulk or your She-Hulk and make it so a turn 6 play is viable instead of your turn 7s. But, like, it's a very interesting situation that deck puts people in my opinion. And while it is a little bit carried by Leech, I think that this is also a metagame. I know people are going to hate this. Miss Marvel is one of the strongest cards. Leech is another one of the strongest cards. And a lot of decks that would not have been viable against things like Loki on their own are viable into those matchups because of Leech. And I just wanted to take a moment to note this, that the metagame has probably 10 decks that I think are legitimately good, and Loki is no longer, like, obvious number one in my opinion. Now here's Lamby to tell you why Loki is number one.
Okay, so Lamby's gonna tell you Loki is number one first because my win rate of Loki is still the highest. Okay, that's one. Okay, second thing. He wants to. I'm sorry. Kia mentioned the leech thing is very interesting. So I also do believe that there's a lot of viable decks in the game right now, but all of it centers around firstly, number one, how do I abuse Miss Marvel in this deck? Because a lot of it is like, let's fit Miss Marvel in, then build around her, which is what I've been doing personally as well. And Leech. I've been playing Leech in like so many of my decks. Like every deck that like can cheat energy or can play Iron Lad, I kind of like autofill with Leech and see what happens. Like I autofill Leech and Doom, and then I go from there. Like my latest Ronin deck, it's not even a Ronin deck, it's a stats deck that plays Leech on 5 because you have stats. That is basically just that. It's Leech leader with possibility of going Iron Lad into Leech, effectively that. So yeah, Leech is like super strong right now, especially like I feel like you're a bit priced in firstly to play Leech in Dark Hawk decks because you know blob is blob, right? So like they blank your entire Dark Hawk game plan if they actually play blob. And like they can even blob on the off lane, not on the Hawk lane, and still beat the Hawk lane because the Hawk goes to 0. So I feel like Hawk decks are a bit priced in to play Leech. And of course, Miss Marvel in general is in like most shells. Like you see Miss Marvel in like everything. So I feel like you start, at least for me right now, many viable decks in the game. Loki obviously is still one. Thanos is one. Tribunal is also viable. But at the end of the day, if you want to build like viable decks right now, you gotta probably look at like, all right, my biggest point stat stick is like Miss Marvel. How do I build from there? How do I branch out? And what can I play in those other slots? It's like Miss Marvel plus like stat stick, then some level of tech for the meta, and then like, all right, what else am I playing for this current archetype? That's like the direction that I feel is currently going in the game, which is interesting because like I keep saying Miss Marvel, Miss Marvel, Miss Marvel, but this is like KM said, 10 different decks. But like they all can play Miss Marvel. So like it's wide open per se.
I have probably like 4 or 5 that don't play Miss Marvel that I actually like, and then a couple more that don't play Miss Marvel that I don't like. But yeah, no, like I like, for example, like I had a deck for a Nihilist Bounce, and I gave it to a couple people. I was like, hey, let me know what you think of this. And the first change one of them made was like, I'm gonna put Miss Marvel in here.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I can't even argue with you. Like, I don't want to do that. I don't think it's very good, but I can't argue that like it can't be that bad because she is.
Yeah, it would make it worse. Much worse, right?
It can't make it that much worse. So, because of the lack of a season pass announcement video at the time we're recording this, which hopefully will have dropped by the time that it actually is out, because good lord, could you imagine if it doesn't? We're going to be talking about a couple of data mined cards here. They are first Skaar and then Caiera. Skaar is the card that has been data mined for the season pass. He is a 6/11, and his text decreases his cost by 2 for each 10 plus power card you have in play. This means that a lot of the time you're going to be playing him as a 4/11, and as we've discussed with, you know, cards like Miss Marvel and Wolf, generally speaking, 4/11s are pretty damn strong. However, the downside is that you have to have these cards on the board where they are potentially vulnerable. And of course, the downside is also that it's kind of hard to get a guy that big on the board before the later turns of the game. The earliest I can think of reliably getting something that size on the board is just playing a Darkhawk out and very much exposing it to things like Enchantress. And maybe you can do something like lockjawing into Magneto, but that doesn't seem particularly, you know, reliable. So most of the time, Skaar is going to be a 4/11 unless you're like a really lucky Lockjaw deck, in which case he's like a 0-11 and extremely busted. But I'm not sure exactly how you can play him in such a way that you end up invulnerable to these dangerous things that can beat you. Lamby, what are your thoughts on Skaar?
All right, so with Skaar, I'm actually quite excited, but I need to like get some points across first for Skaar. So firstly, 6-11. Okay, so we are not looking at this as a 6-11 because
Yeah.
playing it for 6 and then 11 power is not like fantastic. I look at this card more as a 4-11, like you said, on average. And best case, I wouldn't say best case, a good scenario is 2-11. Because the 0-11 scenario is like almost impossible
It's
without like
never
God
happening.
rolling. I mean, like you go Forge Gladiator, Mary, and Forge Gladiator or some Forge Gladiator, Sentry, Red Skull. Okay, no, but like that, no one plays that deck.
Wait,
But like I'm
Forge
just saying,
Gladiator Sentry, you kind of talked me into, right? Like you go
yeah.
Forge Gladiator, Sentry, Annihilus, 2-11.
Yeah. Okay, but at the end of the day, I think the good decks that play Skaar will be a 2-11 Skaar deck. Like not trying to go for the 0-11.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of options like Shuri, Sauron. You go like Sauron into Mary into Red Skull, then you get a 2-11. Of course, that is not better than Shuri Red Skull Task. But it lets you do the bounce thing, which is basically you have a 2-11 and 4 extra energy on turn 6 to allocate very wide, which is sometimes better than just going obviously tall with Shuri Red Skull Task. It's not an upgrade, it's like a side grade option thing. Then we also need to think like what we cutting for the Skaar to do this, right? So like
Yeah.
I'm just saying like it's like an option. Then the other one obviously is like, you know, the lockjaw scenario whereby if you get lucky on turn 4 and 5, you roll 2 big dudes, you get a 2-11. But then, of course, that means that you really need to get lucky. If not, it's gonna be like what 4-11, and then you're not playing Jane on turn 5, which is also kind of sometimes bad. So, like, I'm quite curious to experiment where we can go with Skaar, but I don't want to discount this card because it's like if you think about it as a 2-11, it's disgustingly strong.
Yeah.
But I think one thing I want to get out of the way is that we should not be expecting Skaar as 0-11 dot deck to be like meta or whatever. I don't think it's very possible right now.
Yeah, the Janejaw scenario is really interesting because you look at it and you're like, oh my god, look at all those synergies. Thor, he gets to exactly 10 power. Oh my god, we're cooking, right? And it's like, that does seem like the thing that strikes me as plausible, but here's the issue. You end up conflicting with the everything else your deck wants to do.
Correct.
Because that deck is built to Jane on 5, 6 drop, and, you know, play the zeros on the final turn.
Yes.
And so it's like, when are you actually playing the Skaar? When does that guy actually show up? One of the things I was thinking about is, do you remember when you played Janejaw stuff in Lockjaw Thanos? Could we go back to Thor in there just as a chance to get another guy that's a 10? Is that the kind of thing that we could actually do? I don't really know, but I am like a little bit interested to see where Skaar goes. My instinct is that he's going to be too hard to use. But hey, I mean, if you can get this guy to 2-11, that's an incredibly valuable thing to do. At 4-11, I'm like, okay, if he's a 4-11, the question then becomes...
He's still good, right?
Yeah, like, what is the best card we can pair with him? And the answer is Shadow King, right? So, like, you end up looking for decks that want a 4-11 and a Shadow King, right? Like, and that is a little bit of an easier thing to find. So I think, like, that's likely to be the scenario that he ends up in, where it's like, okay, 4-11 plus Shadow King is good. That means we play Skaar. And I think that's what people need to be looking to build towards when they build Skaar decks.
Yeah, one last thing is I feel like my conclusion with this for now, at least without testing the card, is that you don't build a Skaar deck. You build a deck that can fit Skaar and sometimes get it out for cheap. Like, you know how the old wave lets you go like sometimes wave float 2 into like She-Hulk for 2 plus a thing. Like Skaar is just that other card that lets you have an option to go like 2 like big things on like maybe your final turn instead of like your other game plan. It's just the option. But obviously your deck has to be able to support this. So I'm quite interested to see where we can go with this. But yeah, no, I like Skaar as a card. I don't think he's supposed to be built around, but I think he has potential to be useful in quite a few decks.
A card that seems designed to work well with Skaar is Caiera, a 3/4 that has text protecting each of your 1 and 6 cost cards from being destroyed. Of course, Caiera's ability is an ongoing ability, so your opponent's Super Scroll will get it, and your opponent's Rogue will steal it, and your opponent's Enchantress will shut it down, but it will prevent your 1 cost from dying to Killmonger. It will prevent your 6 costs from dying to Shang-Chi, and that's the kind of thing that can help make this Lockjaw deck make a little more sense, except it costs 3, which is the turn you want to be playing your Lockjaw. So I think I have 2 questions for you on Caiera. The first is, where do you see it outside of, say, Lockjaw Thanos? And the second is, do you think we can play Zoo?
Okay, so I didn't actually even think about the zoo thing, but yes, I think it makes sense in zoo. Because firstly, Caiera, one thing that Caiera has going for the card is that it's a global thing, right? Like
Yep.
pre-nerf Loki, pre-nerf Luke, which means that it just like it works on all 3 lanes, which is kind of important because like it's not like you can armor every lane. I like armor because it's cheaper, but Caiera has some benefit in the sense that I just literally thought of this. But you know where I think this will be the best card? This will be the best card in what we mentioned earlier, She-Not.
Yeah,
You
it's a
have
She-Not
like
card.
Nebula, you have Misty Knight, you have a Sunspot, which is like super important in the deck, and all your winning cards are Infinite, are like She-Hulk, which is actually a 6 cost, and also the Hulk himself. So like I think this card actually fits very nicely into She-Not. I'm interested to try it there. Other than that, though, like you said, it does conflict with the energy slot for some very important cards that we are currently running already, like cost 3, right? So I will get the card to try. But I think currently my head is at She-Not. No, I didn't really think about Zoo because I never thought of Zoo as like something that's really very powerful.
I
Right now. Maybe I'm not
lost to Zoo
wrong, but
yesterday. I
with what?
lost with like a good deck. I
Okay.
lost to Zoo. Like I'm not saying this will make Zoo viable, because if it does anything, what'll likely happen is people will play a lot of Zoo, and then everyone will play Enchantress, and then if you Enchantress the Blue Marvel, Khazar, Caiera,
Yeah.
they just die, right? But like when you have Blue Marvel and Khazar, and those 1-drops are like base 3 to 4 to 5 power, that's a really strong deck. Like, I don't know if people
True.
really grasp just how good a Squirrel Girl is when the squirrels are 3 or 4 power, and
1/9.
yeah, it's just like, oh man, that's really good. It's actually a 110 now if you have both Blue
Oh
Marble and
yeah.
Khazar, because they buffed the
110.
actual Squirrel Girl. And it's like those are like really good numbers. It does have some very defined weaknesses to Enchantress, of course, but like it's a deck that can legitimately output power and is mostly held back by fear right now. So I am excited for that. But yes, I think not necessarily She-Not. Yes, she's a good fit in She-Not. But one of the things I think about a lot is how High Evo Lockdown used to be like the lockdown deck because of how good it was with Storm. And I think one of the main reasons it became not that was because the reasons it was a good lockdown deck were these 1-cost cards, right? You want to put a Sunspot on that lane, you would put a Nebula on that lane. And that's not reliable in a world where people are actually playing Killmonger. And because of that, the lockdown deck du jour became non-reliant on 1-drops, right? You see a lot of like Vision, Doom, Miss Marvel type decks, right? What I want to know is if we can go back to that style of 1-drops and use those to win those lanes. We could also play our Vision, our Doom, our Miss Marvel if we feel the need. But I'm kind of really interested in going back to investigating those 1-drops, because you can win games entirely off of like Nebula and Sunspot in a deck like that. It is extremely powerful. And what I'm wondering about Caiera is not, does it go in She-Not? Because I am fairly certain it absolutely does go in She-Not. But what other high Evo decks are now able to be around more because they can rely on the strongest part of high Evo, which is those 1-drops? And are we able to make high Evo more than just She-Not for once in its lifespan? I think that would be really cool, because other high Evo decks that I play still have to run armor just because getting your 1s blown up is that bad, and now we won't have to. And I think that's a really big deal for the archetype that has the strongest 1-drops in the game. The patch is expected on January 9th, so this topic might be a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think it's good for us to talk about the cards we wished were tuned down a little bit, because that'll give you a perspective of what we think is actually too strong right now, and hopefully you can use that to inform your deck selection. So my patch wish list right now is I would like them to tone down Miss Marvel just a little bit. I'm not sure exactly how. Make her all 4s, add additional requirements to what it takes to get her buffs. I don't necessarily care what it is, but I would like to see them do that. Another thing I would like to see, and this could be put on the back burner a little bit, but I'd like to see it, is I just want to change to Loki. I want him to be a different card. I don't want him to be the card he's been. I think that that is just a thing we've tried, and a thing we've come to the conclusion is not fun at all. Or not necessarily not fun, but incredibly difficult to balance, I think would be the better way to describe it. And I worry that maybe anything that maintains his identity is going to be incredibly difficult to balance, but it's very clear that this iteration is difficult to balance. And one thing that I think people who've watched my stream will notice is how much I prefer playing like the other kinds of decks that are similar to Loki, but they're not Loki. Like if I had the choice between Loki and Annie Bounce, I would rather play Annie Bounce every time. Because when I queue up Annie Bounce, I know what the game is going to look like. When I queue up Loki, I have no idea what the game looks like. And it's just like, I'd like to go back to queuing up a deck because I like the feel of the deck and not queuing up Loki where it's like, well, let's figure out how to BS my way through this one on the fly, right? Like it's fun, but I miss queuing up a deck knowing what I'm going to do in the game. And I would really like to see something changed about Loki if that was at all possible. What about you, Lamby?
Right. So actually, I'll echo your sentiments and add a few more. I've thought about this a bit as well. So firstly, we'll talk about the Loki one, right? Because we're just coming off this one from you. I actually agree that Loki at this point could go two directions. I feel should go two directions. First is they rework the whole card, like you said, to do something completely different. I'm totally fine with that. And one other way to get me or like Loki diehards to stop playing this card is you make it a 4-0. But that's so sad, right? The card will be horrible. As I will not play this card as a 4-0. I admit. But like that's a bit harsh, right? That's super, super harsh. But like other than that, I guess we just go for a complete rework. Because the thing is, personally right now, you mentioned about the going into every game, like trying to figure out how to play your opponent's deck thing. I feel like that is one of my strong suits with Loki because like I can figure out how to play my opponent's deck very quickly on the fly. But once again, it's been 2 months. Come on.
Yes.
I want to like I want to do something different as my
Yes.
best deck, you know? I want to just do something different as my best deck right now. So I think Loki is either rework or make 4-0, but it's not going to be a 4-0, I'm pretty sure. So, alright, so that's my Loki pitch. The Miss Marvel pitch, I can go into a bit more specifics. The card should be nerfed, but not killed. So I think Miss Marvel becoming a 4-4-4, which is like 4 cost, 4 power, buff 4 left and right, or buff 4 on the off lanes. I think we'll still make the card a very good card, just that not absolutely busted. Like people will for sure still play a 4-4-4 Miss Marvel. It's just that probably maybe a bit less, but that's completely fine. One more thing I want to add is I talked about this very roughly in one of the other videos, which is Nico Minoru. I don't think she needs a nerf at all, and I don't want her to be nerfed. But if we were to ever tone down the bounce deck anymore, the bounce synergy anymore, Nico to 1-1. Nico to 1-1 changes so much for the bounce synergy, right? Because Forge makes the double up effect like really a lot worse. Instead of 8, it's 6. And then obviously the like you take 1 power off a 1 cost card and you will see the difference, obviously. So Nico to 1-1 is something I can see, but I hope doesn't happen to her. Yeah, so that's one more thing I want to add. And I think other than that, I don't know, man. I feel like maybe some of our tech cards, like I think Luke Cage is horrible right now. Yeah. Maybe give it back its old effect, but make it like 2-1 or something. I think that's better. But other than that, I guess when it comes to in the way of buffs, I haven't looked at all those unplayed cards I haven't played in a long time, but like maybe unplayed cards get a bit more buffs. Not the Punisher style buff, because the Punisher style buff didn't do anything. But like maybe a buff that actually is Snowguard-esque kind of buff, which would be great, right? Shake up the game a bit.
I've got 2 notes. Note number 1 is I used to think 4-4-4 Marvel would be too harsh, and now I think it wouldn't be too harsh. And the reason I have changed my mind on this is because they nerfed the cards that were doing stats at a better rate than her. And when she's the thing that's doing the stats at the best rate, it's like, okay, well, I guess we gotta deal with her now. Like, yeah, it seems like this is the cycle, right? Like there's one, like the card that does the stats at the best rate, that's the stat stick the metagame is built around, and Miss Marvel is that card now. And you know, while it was previously a little overwhelming to be like, yeah, you should get 3 points off of her because Werewolf was around and was much more egregious. Now Werewolf is gone, Miss Marvel has stepped into that spotlight, and yeah, totally knock it off of her, because behind her there are not a lot of stat sticks that scale up like that. Like, she is the last of the ridiculous stat sticks in this game, I think, right now, at least. And so, yeah, nope, knock her off. Go for the 4-4-4. Now, the second note that I had was a card I would really like to see buffed or maybe reverted. Bring Elsa Bloodstone's ult effect back at +2, please. I just talked about how there aren't enough broken stat sticks. I would tell you right now, if Elsa Bloodstone had her ult effect at +2, I would have investigated Elsa, Kitty, Angela stuff in Loki again, and it might have been fun. It might have been cool. I would have investigated that a lot of places. because like once you get rid of Miss Marvel, we're really, really starving for stat sticks, and Elsa would probably be the last one there that we can actually invest in as an early game scaling stat stick. I kind of wonder if they just don't like that kind of thing at all, but bring her back, please. I'd be interested in that.
Agreed.
So, deck credit is a touchy topic in Marvel Snap for reasons I honestly don't really understand, but I'm going to go into a little bit of conversation about it because it was recently an issue. If you don't know why it was recently an issue, just understand that the original underlying issue was already resolved, and people trying to push drama about it at this point are probably not actually acting in anyone's best interest but their own. That said, I wanted to talk about the conversation surrounding it and how it bothered me in some ways. So the first thing that I wanted to say is the whole debt credit conversation tends to bring out of the woodwork just three types of people that I really, really don't like seeing the opinions of. And the first is the type of person who goes into other creators' mentions and says, hey, isn't this so-and-so's deck? I have been very clear that this is a very unpleasant thing to happen, especially when you didn't do anything wrong or didn't do anything like that on purpose. As someone who is fastidious about debt credit, I get messages like this a fair bit of the time where someone is like, isn't this so-and-so's deck? And then I go look into it and it wasn't, or I was playing it first, or things like that. There have been occasions where someone has been, and I have updated it to correct it. But the point I'm making here is I have long requested that nobody ever do that in any other creator's mentions on behalf of me, and I just think this is a good time to reiterate that request. Do not ever go to some other creator's mentions and say, isn't this a KM best deck? I hate it. Please don't do it. You are not defending me. Now, the second type of guy that came out of the woodwork in this conversation is guys who lean... I guess I shouldn't use guys. It's not like it's unique to one gender. I just use like type of guys to refer to personality types on the internet. But like the second type of person is the kind of person who's like, lol, debt credit in a 12 card game. That's stupid. And I think that that is a reasonable stance to have, but it's not necessarily one that holds up to scrutiny, in my opinion, because I see people talking about like, oh, debt credit, it doesn't matter. You shouldn't give it. You shouldn't worry about it. And I don't think you should worry about it necessarily, but I do think that it's good to help people, and debt credit can help people. I'm going to give you a list of creators that I've given debt credit to. Lamby series. Yo Woody, Hella Enjoyer, Husky Puppies. These are people, W, Equinox. Like, these are people who I personally think would have succeeded anyway. But it's pretty undeniable that having a larger creator co-sign your stuff and say this person is worth listening to will help you grow. And I think that if you are in a position to do that, I see no issue with trying to do it. I think a lot of people who do the like lol 12 card deck, imagine caring thing, it's like, well, you can care, and it can be good to care, and it can be good to help people. It's not, you know, like something you have to do. I don't think everyone has to give debt credit or anything like that, but I do feel like at a certain level, the people that say stuff like that, I feel like they're mocking me for even caring. And it's like, I care because it helps people, and that's a good thing. And then there's one more type of guy, and I honestly find this type of person the most annoying of all of these types that I've talked about that came out of the woodwork. It's guy who plays a deck when it's bad, and then when like 4 meta changes happen and it ends up being good, they're like, you need to credit me for this. I just want to say to anyone who does that, no, you're wrong. Playing stuff at the right time matters. Building a deck is not something that you'd get credit for in perpetuity. Did you guys know I made the first bounce deck? That was me. I did that. I was the first person to do Beast Falcon bounce. We were playing like Human Torch and stuff like that. Like, I was the first person to write a guide to it. Was I the actual first person to play it? No, but I was the first person to write a guide to it. So do I get credit for that in perpetuity? No, it's ridiculous. It's one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. I just think that if someone innovates an idea at a high level in the metagame, an example of this would be the Hella Enjoyer Tribunal deck. That's a deck that a lot of high-level players thought was terrible. Hella Enjoyer took it into the metagame and made it good. And part of what he did, regardless of whether someone else was doing that 2 months ago at rank 80, was make it good in the high level metagame that existed currently. He took that deck into the top 10 of the game. That is something that matters. Proving something that can exist at a high level, that's what innovating a deck is. Not playing it at rank 80 because you own all the cards. And I like, this whole conversation has been a vortex of just like the 3 types of people I whose opinions I dislike the most in the entirety of Marvel Snap. So if you are one of those 3 types of people, I would highly encourage you to please examine why you're saying the things you're saying. And I think also I would highly encourage myself to log off of Twitter after this whole rant, because I think it's ultimately become very clear that I care way too much about the opinions of anonymous internet strangers.
Yeah, I just wanna add like, I mean, I get all your points. Just wanna add a few things to this. So the first thing is, what are you talking about? Raynad created Zoo, he created the world, man.
Right. Yes.
He
Everyone
created
must
everything.
credit Raynad. Good point.
Yes, everyone must credit Raynad. He created the Earth. Okay, anyway, jokes aside, that's a Hearthstone meme from way back. But okay, so I think what Kian mentioned that I want to touch on, that I really strongly vibe with, is when something is good, it's contextually good also. Like being relevant at the right time is very important. Like obviously I popularize, okay, I used the word popularize, not create, because it's very important. Okay, I popularized Silk Smooth archetype during a certain period, but did no one know Silk plus Craven work well together? Obviously they knew like months before I popularized that thing. But like the thing is, like bringing things back at the right time also matters, you know. So like the whole thing that Kia mentioned about like rank 80 playing that 2 months ago, and like very high infinite player playing it now when meta just changed, it's a thing. That one is actually very relevant because it's about time, it's about contextualization. So doesn't mean that you made the deck 3 months ago means that like it was good then and people should credit you because it wasn't good then, you know. It's just that kind of thing. Is simple. And I think another thing is that credit to me, I also agree that like to me personally, that credit is something that I would do because I value opinions of others and I want others to value my opinions as well. So I do it on my own personal level, but like at the end of the day, I don't think it's something that you need to like demand. You know, you don't demand it from someone else, and no one needs to feel like they owe. You don't owe anybody anything, and no one owes you anything. I think that's very important. It's something that like, it's from the bottom of your heart. You just do it because you want to. Yeah. If you don't do it and you don't if you don't do it and you're not actually ripping somebody off, you're not like it's not on your conscience, you know. Maybe you just didn't know that like literally 1 hour ago someone made the same thing. Maybe they made a Twitter post. Maybe you posted 1 hour after them, but you didn't know, right? Like it's on your conscience kind of thing. It's not like you have to feel like horrible because you forgot or you just didn't know, you know. So I think there's 2 sides of the coin that we need to look at.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone should feel horrible about any of this. Like, except everyone I mentioned who's espousing those 3 opinions that I hate. They should feel horrible. Like, I don't think it's something. Yeah, you're correct that it's definitely not something to demand from people. But by the same token, it's not something to mock as this like idealistic, childish thing to care about, right? What makes the people who are overly caring about deck credit annoying is that they're overly caring about it. Like, that's the issue. They're demanding it. And that's what's annoying about it. Not that it's a bad idea. Like I am probably the most fastidious person about this in terms of using my platform to, you know, say, hey, look, this isn't all me. Like, I have a literal entire chat room of very high level players that I rely on for a lot of this. Like, it is a very important thing. And frankly, I wish I made enough money that I could do the VS report thing and just like have them on the channel. Like, I want to do that. That's like a legitimate eventual goal of mine, is that like I can like get things to that level. But I am very, very grateful to the people that help me do what I can do. And so I express that in the best way that I have the ability to do so. And I guess I just think that it's worth caring about, but it's definitely not worth getting all up in the menchies about. Like, And I want to reiterate, if I ever catch anyone, like I'm very serious about this. If I catch anyone on Twitter going into other people's DM or not DMs, going into other people's mentions, being like, "Yo, this is a KM deck," I'll just ban you. Like that is a bannable offense. I'm dead serious. We talked a lot about the influence of Miss Marvel, but I wanted to talk a little bit further about the influence of the Living Tribunal deck specifically, which is at this point, last I checked, the most played deck in Infinite this patch. So I think it is abundantly clear that deck has gotten around. And that means that a lot of the answers to it have gotten around. And between a lot of decks being Miss Marvel decks and the Tribunal deck itself, we have never seen a metagame that is more focused on the cards Rogue and Enchantress. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because playing around Rogue and playing around Enchantress are two very different things. The high-level way of playing around Rogue is stacking multiple useless ongoings in the lane that your one good ongoing is. An example of this would be putting Quinjet in the same lane as Miss Marvel in your Loki deck. Now, you can also be caught off guard by that, because if your opponent is playing Enchantress instead of Rogue, well, they just get a 2-for-1 for free. And this interplay of how to properly play against Rogue versus how to properly play against Enchantress, one wants you to bunch your ongoings up, the other wants you to spread them out. That is, I think, a really interesting metagame dynamic that I want to talk about with Lamby. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually tag my deck very differently for what I see, because like when it comes to, because I play Loki, right? And like my
Yeah.
flag slots is like Rogue and Enchantress. Like the Enchantress is always really only a lot better versus Tribunal, because Tribunal kind of is like priced in to like stack that one lane, right? Because they want to do Iron Man Onslaught, especially Iron Man Onslaught. That's like the thing that they always want in the same lane. So Rogue is like a 50-50 there. Sometimes you get the wrong one, sometimes you get a not so good one, but Enchantress just blanks it. So like I feel like it's very dependent on like whether you're seeing enough Tribunal decks. In this case, well, at high level, there's quite a bit of Tribunal. So I've been running Enchantress for quite a bit instead of Rogue. But of course, Rogue has the benefit of, I think Rogue's prime target in the meta right now, to anybody's surprise, is Miss Marvel. Like Rogue is just the best like Miss Marvel counter in a sense, because you benefit from it while they don't. You actually go like -10 plus 10 is like +20 is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So like for a 3-cost card, it's like +20 stats for a 3-cost card on like the final turn, which is mad. So like in the grand scheme of things, I think because Miss Marvel is still the more popular card, I am favoring Rogue right now. But of course, like if it ever like devolves to be like somehow more people are playing Tribunal than Miss Marvel, which I cannot see it happening, then maybe Enchantress will be the general more
Yeah.
popular deck of choice. But of course, you also cannot forget that like in Zabu decks in particular, Miss Marvel, Enchantress is like a 3-5, and it's it's actually relevant stats, you know. So like I mean, you just gotta be careful, right? Like using Enchantress in your own Miss Marvel Zabu deck also has, you gotta be careful, because you don't want to stack stuff and then have to be forced to Enchantress yourself, which I've seen a lot of people do already. So I at the end of the day, my conclusion is that I still prefer Rogue in the grand scheme of things, but Enchantress is definitely way better into Miss Marvel decks, into Tribunal decks. Of course, then there are those Tribunal decks that just play the Cosmo and nothing works, which is actually quite a scary thought. But
Yeah.
I've seen not that many Cosmos in Tribunals so far. There are a
It's
few,
hard
but
to fit it
not a
in
lot.
without sacrificing something else, right? You end up either
Yeah, correct.
sacrificing a card draw like Jubilee or Iron Lad, or you end up sacrificing like a discounter. Finally, we wanted to talk about the Black Knight deck, courtesy of XUNZZZ. I think that's how you spell it. I'm sorry if I
Yeah, I
misspelled
got it.
your name entirely composed of gibberish. But one of the weird things about this deck that is extremely not apparent until you play it is that it is literally just the Revis Sarah deck, but with a little more high roll in it. And that was like such a confusing thing to look at to me, because it's like, okay, you look at these decks and you're like, oh, they're totally different. They're not different at all. They're the exact same deck. They are doing the exact same thing, except one of them has like a dumb high roll and the other one is more consistent. And I honestly don't even think you need the dumb high roll in order to make the deck good. Like when I look at this deck, I know it sounds weird, but I look at it and I'm like, oh, this is just worse Revis Sarah. It's like, oh my god, what a weird statement for a Black Knight deck. Like, it's so fascinating how this deck can be so different while also doing the same thing and filling the same role as a deck that runs maybe 5 of the same cards. It's a very fascinating thing to me. What are your thoughts on the deck?
Right. So a lot of people know me for being someone that pushes my opinions very aggressive positively aggressively, which means like when I actually push something, I've actually tested it to the point where I truly believe in it. So that's my credibility right there. So a lot of people have been trying to get me to like jump on this Black Knight train, and I recently decided to just like, okay, let's just try to see if I can actually and will willingly jump on this Black Knight train. If you guys don't know already, I'm also a very big fan of the reverse Sarah deck. It's like one of my favorite, actually it's my only favorite Sarah deck
The only
since the
time it's
previous
ever
point
been good.
stand. Yeah, it's my favorite Sarah deck like ever because it's just stats, and then even if the tech doesn't work, you have stats. But okay, digressing. So I tried the Black Knight deck, and one thing I realized about the Black Knight deck is, yes, I can admit that if you hit Black Knight into discard into like Zabu and like playing the Sword and then Ghost Rider stuff, you are like nigh unbeatable because at the end of the day, it's so much unkillable and unremovable stats. But what I realized is the problem with, okay, so firstly, yes, the deck Tyro is real and it's very powerful, yes. But like what I realized is the times you don't, your deck falls apart so hard. Like the times you don't, your deck really falls apart so hard. And there is a lot of dead space. When I was playing the deck, I realized I was doing a lot of things like not playing cards, not spending my energy because I couldn't, and if I did, my combo would fall apart the moment I draw the next card, which was meant to be held together with the discard card that I played because I need to play cards. But like, so I was holding a lot of stuff, I was not playing a lot of cards. And like I was losing a lot of games just because I couldn't do anything. And the games that I was winning, right, I was winning overly hard. It's kind of weird, right? It's like, okay, my definition of winning overly hard is like, why win a lane with like 100 power when you need to win 3 lanes with 10 power each? You know, that kind of thing. Okay, this is a bit drastic, but
it's
the Black Knight deck,
right.
yeah, the Black Knight deck felt like when I was winning so hard that nothing else I did mattered. But when I was losing so easily as well. So and I think the Black Knight like that tries to go too hard on its like winning with the high roll, and its low rolls are honestly quite suboptimal. So I decided to not really like, you know, I couldn't push the deck in good faith because I felt like this deck doesn't win me enough when I'm not doing the one good thing that the deck does.
And to be clear, the one good thing the deck does is completely bonkers. Like Zabu or Sarah into those like the 2/4 Ghost Rider plus a Blade, totally unbeatable. Like it is extremely powerful. But it only does that. Like you can play a half-assed Sarah build like that the rest of the time, but you're just going to be better off in a lot of those situations just playing the normal Sarah build, I think. And so while it is cool that Black Knight is good, and I do think Black Knight is good, and I was really excited for that text change, and I'm glad that this is happening. Right now, I think you're probably better served by just playing the Revis Sarah deck and not over investing in BK. All right, y'all. Happy New Year. This is our first episode of the new year. Actually, we're recording this at a time where it's not the new year for me, but it is the new year for Lamby. But you're going to see it at a time where it is the new year for both of us. So thank you so much for sticking with us. And here's to a fantastic 2024. Lamby, take us out.
All right, so if you like what you just saw, comment, subscribe to KM's channel, and do look forward to the next episode. We'll see you guys real soon. Happy 2024.
That one's on his channel.